Traders, how are you? With Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. This week we have news on the epic amount of cash that Warren Buffett has, a new record. We have the thing in your arm companies, the jab companies, finally admitting some of the lethal side effects. And we also have some interesting news on the climate front and power generation. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, it is earnings season, so a lot of the corporations, these huge corporations, are all reporting their earnings, how much they made and lost, and the expectations of what they're going to make this year in the first semester. They reported all that. 46% of the S&P 500 firms reported the results so far, and 4 out of every 5 surpassed expectations. So, seems like everything's doing great. But a lot of them are also advising that the expectations of the revenue to come this year or in the future is not going to be as great. Now, we also had a big piece of news in regards to a temporary ceasefire in Israel and Gaza that caused not havoc in the markets, but it caused them to move quite a bit. The markets in the United States were mostly positive. He's crying. I'm going to let him down for a second. The markets in the United States went up for that reason. Toronto, the great Communist Republic of Canada, they were flat, but obviously by having that temporary ceasefire, even though it's temporary, there's hope and there's a lot less uncertainty in regards to what's going to happen with all these wars that we have going on, because remember that Ukraine also is still going on as well. In some of the conspiracy theory news, the Chinese country is now generating more electricity than all of the G7 nations combined. Now, G7 is Japan, United States, Canada, Italy, France, Germany. I think I already said Japan. The UK, I think, is the one that was missing. But one of the things that's interesting, especially about this green movement, is that between China and India, both of them combined, they're opening one coal-powered power plant, tongue twister. So between China and India, between both of them, they're opening one coal-powered power plant a week. And one of the things I find interesting, and the reason why I ask is, why is this happening? Why is it that they want to shut down all this electric generation and, don't use gas-powered cars, and carbon is the problem in the West and Europe and the US and Canada and all these countries, but nobody talks to India and China about actually reducing their carbon emissions. They're actually increasing them more every day. That, to me, says a lot. It's not really anything about the environment, because if it was an existential threat, people would be talking to India, China to stop that, or maybe doing nuclear or wind or solar or, something else. But they're not. Why is that? Canadian Town in the Communist Republic of Canada is now requiring people a QR code to be able to leave the town. And AstraZeneca, the maker of one of the thingy things in your arm, finally admitted for the first time that the thing in your arm can cause rare, quote unquote, rare, in a tense legal fight with victims of the defective jab. One of the things that's interesting as well is that a lot of the insurance companies now are talking about the excess mortality, meaning the amount of people dying above much higher than the norm. And it's 40% higher between people 18 to 30, 40 years old. Imagine that. In overseas market news, Germany reported higher than expected inflation. They did have higher food prices and a smaller drop in energy prices. That brought the European markets lower. The one in Istanbul, if you count that as Europe, was the most positive of all. Latin American markets were mostly mixed. The Merval in Argentina is at over 13% after the new liberal, we don't say that in the U.S., libertarian. The first libertarian president, sorry if you can hear the big massives, they get a little crazy at this time at night because they're hungry. The African and Middle Eastern markets, I didn't finish about Argentina. He's lowered the inflation rate by absolutely slashing government costs and expenses down to a crawl. So now Argentina, which remember was at one point the richest country in the world, the richest, not one of the richest, the richest. Hopefully we'll head back in that direction. Africa and the Middle East, mostly higher. Asia and Australia, the whole Far East portion of the world, Hong Kong was the biggest winner there. Most of those markets were positive. And in Bitcoin and crypto news, the end of the month brought the Bitcoin down, which is the first negative months for 8 months, down 15%, but it's still positive over the year over year. For the week, it went up 0.28%, just under 63,000. So 62,939. And in commodities, crude now is at its lowest level in 7 weeks as crude stockpiles surged due to lackluster demand. There was also the help with the temporary ceasefire in the situation with the war in Israel and Gaza. And for the U.S. crude, they went down over 7% to 78.11, while Brent went down almost 8% to 82.96. The coffee prices came back down. I haven't looked at the cacao prices this week, but I imagine they came down a little bit as well whenever we have the situation where there's a lot less uncertainty, because of the temporary ceasefire. World War III isn't going to happen. That's what everybody kind of was announcing when Iran attacked Israel. Everything kind of calms down and gets back to normal. So there is one market, however, that's starting to see a lot of movement, and that's the nickel market. Remember that nickel is one of the most important materials in the batteries, especially for the electric vehicles. And now there was a huge supply dump from Indonesia with the help of Chinese technology and mining and everything else. There's now a situation where a lot of other mines around the world may risk bankruptcy if they don't get help from their governments. So now there's a situation where essentially Indonesia could have a complete power grip on the entire nickel market, kind of like what OPEC does with oil, even though it's a lot higher percentage of share of the market. And that means China would control it too, because essentially, China and Indonesia, if China helped them to do that with all the mines, obviously they're going to control it. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're actually doing this on purpose to be able to control that market, especially since we need a lot of the nickel for the batteries. Gold went down for the week, 1.57% to 2,302.50. Silver is down almost 2.50% to 26.61. This again is due to the fact that less uncertainty, people buy less gold and silver or start to dump it, and that's why it came down. Financial and banking news, preliminary data in the Eurozone is saying that the inflation rate is holding steady at 2.4%, which is what was expected. And in political news, the corrupt Prime Minister of Spain, of the Socialist Party, Pedro Sanchez, decided to stay in office after about a week of drama. It's always the left causing the drama. Economic news, industrial profits in China fell in March, slowing growth to 4.2% compared with the same period a year ago, which was 10.2%. So you can see that China is still the second largest economy in the world, showing some cracks in its armor. South Korea industrial production fell to its lowest in 15 months. Now, South Korea is in one of the largest economies in the world, but they're the 8th or 9th largest exporter in the world. And remember that Samsung, a huge technological conglomerate, is from Samsung. So if they're starting to show some kinks in their armor as well, that means that it could not bode well for the overall economy. And the U.S. consumer confidence is at its lowest level since mid-2002 in March, as fears are starting to grow about employment and inflation. For example, Google has decided to fire people and start hiring illegals and move positions to Mexico, for example. And in April, the U.S. economy added 175,000 jobs. The unemployment rate went up to 3.9% in April, and that is higher than expected. So it looks like things aren't going well in that direction either. And the jobless rate is tied for the highest level since January 2022. In corporate news, the second Boeing whistleblower has died at the age of 44, which is, super weird. McDonald's and other big brands are starting to report that low-income consumers are starting to crack. I think what they said was that people that make under $40,000 a year can't really shop at McDonald's anymore, which is ironic because before, everybody who didn't have any money went to eat at these fast food joints. And Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, reported huge year-over-year income margins. They made $11.22 billion in profit the first quarter, $11 billion in 3 months. And the operating margin in a lot of their companies absolutely skyrocketed. For example, Geico, which is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, their underwritings, meaning the policies that they wrote, went up to 185% year over year. So everything in Warren Buffett's world is going great. He did notice, most people didn't notice, did sell some Apple shares. Apple shares went up 7% after they did beat estimates, but they announced a $110 billion repurchase program. And also, Overall sales fell 4%, and iPhone sales fell 10% year over year. Tesla saw their shares rise 15% after they're able to sell their, what's it called? I have it written here. Give me a second. Their full self-driving technology in China. They got approval on Sunday. They also announced they're going to start letting go hundreds of people from the company. Obviously, the demand for electric cars is down. In addition to them lowering prices, they're also letting go of 2 senior executives. And Starbucks, people finally figured out that they don't have to spend a fortune for a cup of coffee. You can make it at home for $1. On Wednesday, Starbucks shares went down over 15% to $74.44 after their financial results were not good at all. They missed on both top and bottom lines, and I think they're probably not going to continue to do not well, even though I said that grammatically not correct, but you guys understand what I'm saying. Because then people understand now that you don't have to pay $20 for a cup of coffee. Walmart's net sales for groceries in the U.S. rose nearly 7%. Walmart, their sales, 60% of those sales is from the grocery section. They're going to come out with a new brand line called Better Goods to be able to try to retain the customers that they obtained after the pandemic. It's 2024, so 4 years later is when they decide to do something to retain those customers, which is ironic. And Walmart, if you didn't know, is the largest grocer in the country in the United States by revenue. DoorDash went down 10% after they had an operating loss, even though the revenue did come higher than expected. The stock was down over 18% on Monday, but it's positive for the year, kind of same numbers as Tesla when it comes to the stock results. And in technology, NASA uses a laser link to beam 140 million miles across space at 25 megabytes per second. I thought those were actually pretty cool. And in the study in the EU now is going to need tariffs of 55% to try to counteract the damage that's caused by the import of the electric vehicles from China. I think right now they have about a 10% or a 20% rate. But as I mentioned to you guys, not last week, but the week before, a lot of countries are looking at doing this because it's going to completely flood the market with these cheap cars. And in international events, Philippines closed schools down, and they're warning of an overload of the power grid. The entire continent of Asia is going through an absolutely massive heat wave. Malaysia, Thailand, India, China, they're all getting hit really hard. And in some areas in the Philippines, it's going to hit 113 degrees Fahrenheit, the heat index, 45 degrees Celsius. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. And remember, the preppers were right.